I'm going to go ahead and just give you a very brief intro to a number of other activities along the same lines. So remember we said there were dialogue-based activities, and those are the more interpersonal, the more, sort of human side of things. And then the experiential activities are more about the cognitive and the affective, where we're trying to develop that suspending of judgment and the sort of openness to other perspectives, right? So with the dialogue-based activities, here are a few options beyond the ones that we specifically mentioned along with the five nosy questions. So story stitch, story circles, those are both frameworks for taking diverse groups and giving them a structure to guide discussion and dialogue within smaller groups. So you take a large group, break them down into smaller groups, and it gives a way for them to interact with each other and get to know each other as cultural beings and share experiences and gain insights across cultural differences. So those are both ones that I would recommend. Story Stitch has the advantage of being able to be done online as well as in person. Story Circles is the one that Darla Deerdorf developed, and it's not supported by, but disseminated by, I don't know what word you would use there, by UNESCO. So that's a popular option. Counter storytelling is a little bit more advanced. I use this one with graduate students, with faculty groups. If you have any more advanced learners, it's a really good activity for getting people to think deeply about what common narratives they hear about cultural groups, and then to either find or tell their own counter narratives that bring different perspectives and give a more nuanced understanding of cultural experiences and get at things beyond that sort of essentialized, monolithic, dominant narrative kind of approach. And then Crossing Borders Education Peer Dialogues. If you're not familiar with Crossing Borders Education, it's a nonprofit out of the UK that does a lot of really wonderful media work, but they have this this peer dialogue methodology that has media embedded in it, and I cannot enough highly recommend it because I have witnessed it really, opening up people so that they're more willing to dialogue. There's some secret sauce in there that when people see their peers in a video dialoguing about what they're about to dialogue about and modeling that, it really like immediately jumpstarts the conversation for them in a way that is kind of magical. So if you haven't seen that, check that out because it's a great methodology. And then the experiential activities that we wanted to highlight very briefly. These are some of my favorites that I assign to learners all the time. Language envelopes, just to talk in terms of pros and cons. It's one of my favorites because it's very experiential. It's very hands-on. There's like objects that people are sort of playing with and fiddling with. And I've never done it where people haven't had these epiphanies of like, it's amazing how many different ways to organize objects there are. And we have this gut instinct to organize them in a particular way that's often shaped by the language that we speak and the culture we come from. But there are lots of other valid ways to organize them as well. And so an activity like this that is hands-on and really sort of exploratory is a great way to open people up to different interpretations, different perspectives, different ways of experiencing the world. But the cons are, because it's experiential, it has all these things that are there, is that it does take quite a bit of preparation to get it together. And once you have it done, you can use it over and over. But meanwhile, you've got to collect all those little objects for them to play with. So grocery store ethnography and YouTube ethnography, these are, and really Amazing Race, these are more send people out into their local environment to do things and then reflect on them. And they have different approaches. YouTube one is obviously online. Amazing Race uses photography. Grocery store ethnography, is set in a food scenario. But they all are sort of getting people to be more aware of how they are interpreting things, and then how local interpretations might be very different from their own. So those are some dialogue-based and experiential activities. Again, we are going to provide all these links to you in that collection I mentioned on the Intercultural Learning Hub. So don't feel like you have to write down those links because they're all there for you to just click on. So I want to take a few minutes before we turn to assessment to get you to share, because I know a lot of you are experienced professionals that you facilitate intercultural learning, global learning, and other related um, learning overarching learning outcomes that include openness all the time with learners. And so if you have any favorites that we have not mentioned, please, please, please take this moment to share them into chat. And in the meantime, the HubICL, so if you created a HubICL account long ago, it's important for you to know that we have opened it up, open access, so you no longer need to log in to the HubICL to access anything in terms of downloads. The only time you actually need to be logged in is if you are contributing something nowadays. So you'll be able to click on the one link that we send you to the collection and even share it with other people, and nobody needs to actually have an account in the HubICL to access them. All right, so favorites. Anybody have anything that they want to share in chat, a name or description of an activity? If you feel comfortable, you're also welcome to unmute your mic and actually describe an activity for us. Specifically, hopefully related to openness. While you're typing and thinking about that, we have just a couple of slides that we want to talk about in this backward design kind of a vein about how you might want to go about choosing openness activities. And yeah, I can't remember if this was you, Horane, or if the next slide is you.
Yeah, this one's me too. Yeah,
Okay.
I got you. So I kind of hinted at this in as we were debriefing the 5 nosy questions activity. So remembering sort of which component of openness are you looking at in deciding on the activity, and knowing the specific goals that you have and the outcomes that you want for students. Thinking through, so the question about how much time to give students and so on, we've sort of put out a list of things here that you might consider: the time, the resources, your own capacity and risk for vulnerability, your identity, students' identities, the medium of instruction, online, face-to-face, hybrid. So all those things are really important to consider when deciding on an activity. But it really starts with the goals. What do you want students to be able to do? If it's to initiate, and at what level, it's at the beginning. So if it's early in the semester, early in the learning experience, we might consider doing one of the experiential activities, or a lower level, less vulnerability, risk type of activity that gets them talking to one another. A lot of people in the comments mentioned about building community. So those are factors one would need to consider as you do it. Any other thoughts? Anything anyone would like to add? Something that we missed in terms of consideration, or something you consider as you design your experiences and activities? All right, Kris, you can go to the next slide. Feel free to post in the chat. Implementation. These 3 things are really valuable in terms of learners' background and prior experiences interacting with people who are culturally different. So as we choose an activity, we don't want to induce anxiety, trauma, or anything like that we want people to be uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable to the point that they are unable to engage. So think of the anxiety curve. Someone has too much anxiety. A pre-assessment is one way that I do that in my classes, sending out a pre-course survey where I ask people even questions about sort of how they engage or participate in class. And knowing that information first helps me to say some things in class before we do certain activities to set it up, and then scaffold the different activities appropriately. The second point sort of connects to that. The knowledge and skills learners need to develop before encountering. So I mentioned listening earlier, and there are different, I've provided a link here to resources that help you identify if listening is going to be an important skill for later in the course. May want to do that earlier, because people might not have already had that experience. And then finally, the learner artifact. of what is it that you want students to be able to produce at the end. So if it's an individual or a group debrief or reflection, they're going to create something digital media. All of that goes into your planning and deciding which activity. Sometimes we tend to like choose sort of the easy method of a reflection, of an individual reflection, written reflection. But when you have, sort of that pre-assessment, knowing what skills and knowledge students are bringing into the classroom, that can do a lot in terms of allowing them opportunities to choose from options acceptable to you, because you don't need to grade a whole lot of things if you're in a kind of course setting like I am, of different things. You don't want to have to do that, but being very intentional and clear about knowing what they will be producing at the end. Again, tying back to your goals and aligning those very clearly.